Hi people, it's Archivist here with a review for Insidious Chapter 3. And what a scary, horrifying film this was. But what was it like quality-wise, and really how frightening was it? Well, I think to begin with I should speak about what I think of Insidious as a franchise overall. And I think where Insidious really defines itself as a franchise is its ability to explain itself, to really tell you why things are happening, and also character development. I think something you see in a lot of horror films is almost a total neglect to developing characters and really bringing along the story, because you have these shock horror moments to scare you, and they really do just rely on them, you know, like a theme park ride. But really these are movies, and as such they have an obligation to tell us a story, as well as of course frightening us every now and then. And I think that's where Insidious does a great job. And not just Insidious 1, where I think it was done well, and Insidious 2 as well, but I think Chapter 3 really gets it right with building up the characters before it gets into scaring you. You get to know this character, the main character of this particular film, known as Quinn, and she's this average teenage girl. In fact, you know, the first part of this film could really be from any genre. You know, she's had this tragedy, it's told to you fairly early on, where she's tragically lost her mother to cancer, and naturally she wants to contact her because she's so desperate to talk to her again. And this is the setup essentially to bad things going on, and she meets with the established character in the franchise already, Elise, who's like the clairvoyant, played by Lynn Shay. She's very good in the role, and I think Stephanie Scott, who portrays Quinn, is very good. I haven't actually seen her in anything else, totally unfamiliar actress to me, but I think she did a very good job. She got both sides, I think, right with this. Both terrified at times as well as gleeful and happy, a whole range of emotions, because there are different aspects of where she's going to be happy in some parts and of course terrified beyond belief in others. And it does a great job for the first, it's hard to say really, about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes of just establishing her character. But then of course, being a horror film, things start happening. You start seeing strange things, not obvious, but just some shadows, moving shadows that aren't quite right. And then the jump scares come in. And I think that's something to really talk about with this film, the method through which it tries to frighten you. And these are primarily jump scares. And there are two ways you can really go about doing jump scares. There's the come out of nowhere jump scare, and yes, they are in the film. And to be honest, most people tend to look down on these because they're very easy to do, they're very exploitative. You know, you can just do it in real life, really. Just go up to someone and clap your hands in front of their face and just go freak them out. There's no real art to it. But where Insidious Chapter 3 gets it right is with the tension. Because there are many bits where, yes, there is eventually a jump scare, but there is a huge amount of tension beforehand. You know something's going to happen, but you have no idea when or how or where it's going to come from. It keeps you guessing. It freaks you out when it happens. I mean, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but there are certain things that the monster here leaves behind, and it's followed by the characters, and you know that at any point it could jump out at them, and you're thinking when, and it's really difficult to look at the screen, the cinema screen, because you're so tense, you're so on edge, because you know any minute it's going to jump out at you, and almost always it does eventually. I think there was only a few times where it tries to feign it. The direction in this film is done so well. I mean, just looking down a dark hallway is enough to freak you out, because you learn throughout the film that when things start going dark and when the music starts to go away, you know something bad's about to happen. So, speaking generally to acting, I don't think any expense was spared here. A lot of the time you get some really cheesy actors in horror films where all they're good for is screaming. But as I've already mentioned with Stephanie Scott, she was very good. Lynn Shay, similarly good. She was good in the last Insidious films. You had, I'm just going to call them the Ghostbusters in this film. They were in the previous ones. They're essentially the comic relief in there. They do a good job, but they don't have an enormous impact on the film as a whole, which is kind of good, because although they are good for comic relief, if they were too much comic relief, hey, it wouldn't be a horror film, would it? And you've also got this new dad character as well. It's generally a very strong performance, with perhaps the exception of some tertiary characters who you wouldn't really expect to have strong performances anyway, and you barely see them anyway, so who really cares? So I've talked about how this film scares you, the characters. something that's very strong in this film is the atmosphere and how it's created. So in a lot of scenes, you'll see initially it's very light, a room that's totally visible, but they'll find ways of darkening it for you. And you know that when something goes dark, there's almost certainly something lurking in it somewhere. And they do this through two ways. You've just got, your classic dark room, bad things can happen in dark rooms. And you've also got the supernatural other plane known as the Further, where these ghostly apparitions live, and some of them are so freaky. They've done an excellent job with I'll just call it the monster design, quite frankly. And while the monster design, the way they look, these ghosts look, is genuinely freaky and in some cases deeply disturbing, the main demon in this, the main antagonist, I won't ruin his shtick, but the bad guy, essentially, he wasn't really fleshed out enough in my opinion. If you've watched the previous films, if you watched especially Insidious Chapter 2, you'll know that the villain in that was given his entire backstory. It was all out there. You understood him and it did a lot for the character. You knew why he was doing what he was doing, and it was a very disturbing background. Here you just know it's a wrongdoer, it's a parasite. You don't know exactly why it's doing what it's doing. You know it's evil, you know to fear it, but you're like, why? Why do I, why did it end up like this? Something that I did find very impressive was the film's ability to essentially scare you a lot without ever resorting to gratuitous violence. In fact, the violence in this film never really goes much further than a few kicks around, really. This is no savage drag me to hell Saw type film. It relies solely on disturbing imagery and tension to get that fear across, and I do respect that. I think when you see horror films devolve into nothing but a gore fest, you do think, well, this is just a bit cheesy, to be honest, and if anything, it's getting a bit ridiculous. And luckily, Insidious Chapter 3 never strays into that territory even once. So I think it is very impressive that it managed to be so terrifying and tense without ever resorting to, horrifying acts of violence on people. And I think the way to close this review would just be to say the impact this film has had on me frightening-wise. How scary is it? Will I be able to sleep tonight after having watched it? I think, yes, I'm going to be able to sleep fine tonight, because although it was a tense film, it was a scary film, the fact it relied primarily on tension meant that a lot of the fear was very much in-the-moment fear. There was only one, for me personally, there was only one moment that I was like, oh, that's a bit disturbing, I don't like the look of that, that might come back to me in my dreams. But on the whole, I'd say a scary film, a thrill ride, but I wouldn't necessarily, well, different people, different extremes, but don't necessarily think, oh, I won't be able to sleep for months, that kind of thing. But on the whole, a very solid film, not just a scary film, not just a reason to go and scare yourself, but actually an entertaining and well-made film. So Insidious Chapter 3 is a triumph, and if you're a fan of horror, I would definitely recommend trying it. If you get scared easily and don't enjoy getting scared easily, I wouldn't recommend it, but if if you're a thrill seeker and this kind of thing, go for it. You won't be disappointed.